The night the Vampire King almost died, no one noticed the girl cleaning blood from the marble floor. Lila Hart had learned how to be invisible long before she ever stepped inside Blackthorn Palace. Growing up in foster homes across the city taught her 2 rules: speak softly and don't expect rescue. By 21 she worked double shifts as a banquet server for elite supernatural events. Silent, efficient, forgettable. That's why no one saw her when she slipped into the lower corridor with a tray of crystal glasses the night of the Winter Sovereign Gala. But she saw everything. The palace glittered like a kingdom carved from starlight. Silver chandeliers shimmered above immortal nobles draped in velvet and ancient jewels. Vampires moved with effortless grace, their laughter low and dangerous. Humans like Lila were hired help, necessary, tolerated, and easily discarded. At the center of it all stood King Adrian Vale. He was exactly as terrifying as the rumors promised, tall, dark-haired, dressed in black tailored silk that looked stitched for midnight. His presence bent the air around him. Every noble bowed slightly when he passed. Even the alpha lords lowered their gaze. Lila had never spoken to him. She wasn't supposed to. Her manager, Mr. Dorsey, had made that very clear earlier that evening after she'd accidentally brushed against a vampire duchess. "Know your place," he'd hissed, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "If you embarrass this company again, you're out." So Lila kept her head down. Until she heard the whisper. 2 noblemen stood near the western archway, voices low. "Midnight toast. Silver goblet. He'll never see it coming." Lila would have walked away. She should have. But then she saw one of them slip a small vial into his sleeve. Her stomach dropped. She didn't understand vampire politics, but she understood poison. And she understood danger. Minutes later, she watched as the ceremonial tray was prepared. 1 goblet, etched with the royal crest, was placed front and center. The silver goblet. Her hands went cold. She could tell security. Except security didn't listen to human servers. She could tell her manager. Except he'd accuse her of lying for attention. The orchestra began to play. Midnight approached. King Adrian stepped onto the raised platform. His voice rolled through the hall like distant thunder. "Tonight, we celebrate unity among the houses." The goblet was handed to him. Lila's heart pounded so violently she felt dizzy. If she stayed silent and he died, she would live with that forever. If she stepped forward and was wrong, she'd be arrested, or worse. The goblet touched his lips. And Lila ran. Gasps echoed as she shoved through silk gowns and tailored coats. Before she could think, before fear could stop her, she grabbed the king's face. And kissed him. The room exploded in outrage. Immortals snarled. Nobles shouted. Someone grabbed her arm. But she didn't pull away. As her lips pressed against his, she tipped the goblet from his hand. The silver cup shattered against marble. The scent hit instantly, bitter, sharp, wrong. The king's eyes flashed from steel gray to pitch black. Silence fell. His hand wrapped around her waist, not gently. "Explain," he said, voice calm and lethal. Lila trembled but met his gaze. "It was poisoned." A noble laughed nervously. "Preposterous. She's a human." Adrian lifted 1 finger. The laughter died. "Test it," he ordered. Within seconds, a guard knelt, dipped a blade into the spilled liquid, and brought it to a restrained servant animal used for detection. The animal convulsed. Dead in seconds. A ripple of shock tore through the hall. Adrian's grip tightened slightly. "You risked your life," he said quietly to Lila. "Why?" "Because no one ever saved mine." But she didn't say that. "Because it was right." Murmurs spread through the court. Mr. Dorsey pushed forward, pale and sweating. "Your Majesty, she's unstable. She's been warned about disruptive behavior." Adrian's gaze snapped toward him. "Remove him." Guards seized the manager before he could finish. The crowd parted. The king turned back to Lila. "You kissed me in front of the entire sovereign court." Her face burned. "Yes, Your Majesty. You could be executed for that." "I know." His eyes studied her, not as a ruler examining a servant but as something else. Something curious. "You will come with me." Gasps again. "To ensure your protection," he added coolly to the court. "The one who attempted my assassination is still at large." The nobles didn't argue. They feared him too much. Lila's world shifted that night. Within the hour, she was escorted to the highest tower of Blackthorn Palace. The royal chambers. She stood near the window, staring at the city lights below, feeling completely unprepared for what she'd done. The door shut behind her. King Adrian removed his coat slowly. "You understand," he said without looking at her, that whoever poisoned that goblet will try again. Yes. And you are now the only witness. Her breath caught. You could send me away, she whispered. No. He finally turned toward her. And for the first time she didn't see a monster. She saw exhaustion, loneliness, a king surrounded by enemies. You saved my life, he said. I do not discard those who show courage. Lila swallowed. I didn't do it to be rewarded. I know. He stepped closer but not threateningly, protectively. And that, he murmured, is precisely why you matter. Outside, thunder rolled across the winter sky. Inside the palace, whispers of rebellion were already spreading. But in that quiet chamber, something far more dangerous began. A bond forged by a single desperate kiss. And neither of them yet understood that it would change the fate of the entire vampire kingdom. The palace was quiet now, but the silence felt alive, charged with the kind of tension that only centuries-old walls could hold. Lila Hart sat on the edge of a high velvet chaise in the king's private chambers, her hands tightly folded in her lap. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly, oblivious to the night's near catastrophe. Inside she felt trapped, caught between fear, awe, and something she couldn't yet name. King Adrian Vale moved silently around the room, a shadow in motion. Every step he took seemed deliberate, measured, as if centuries of experience had trained him to command even the air itself. He stopped by the enormous fireplace, silver eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. You're trembling, he observed, his voice low and smooth. I'm fine, Lila said, though her knees refused to stop shaking. He didn't respond immediately. Instead he studied her, the corners of his lips barely twitching, not quite a smile. The kind of expression that sent shivers down the spine because it was almost gentle, but still dangerous. You could have died tonight, he said finally, turning to face her fully. And yet you didn't hesitate. Why? Lila swallowed hard. She had rehearsed an answer in her head, but now that she faced the man she had kissed, risked everything for, words seemed meaningless. Because it was right, she whispered again, the same words she had used before. Adrian studied her longer, as if trying to see past her words into her very soul. Most humans would run. Most humans would hide. But not you. You're different. Lila's heart thudded violently. She wanted to say more, to explain her past, her lonely life, her constant struggle to survive without anyone ever noticing. But the words refused to form. Instead, she just stared, feeling the heat of his gaze like a physical weight pressing against her chest. Then came a soft knock on the door. A guard entered quietly. Your Majesty, the East Wing is secure, he reported. No sign of the intruder who attempted the poisoning. Adrian nodded, his expression darkening. Prepare the palace. This is far from over. The guard left and silence returned, heavier this time. Lila's eyes followed Adrian as he moved toward the massive windows overlooking the city. His reflection merged with the night, majestic, untouchable, and terrifying. Will they come again? She asked quietly. Yes, Adrian said without turning. Because they know now that you are important. That your courage makes a difference. Lila shivered. Important? I'm just a human. A server. Adrian finally looked at her, eyes locking on hers with an intensity that made her blood run cold and warm all at once. You're more than that, he said. And that is why I cannot let you leave. Lila's mind raced. I'm not asking to stay, she said softly, trying to find the courage in her words. I don't want to be a burden. You are not a burden, he said sharply. You saved my life. And now, until this threat is dealt with, you remain here. Under my protection. The words felt like chains, but strangely comforting ones. Lila nodded, even though inside, panic mixed with awe. She had spent her entire life avoiding danger, keeping herself invisible. Now she was living in a palace, in a tower, protected by a man who could crush her with a thought, and yet he didn't want to. As the night stretched on, Adrian moved silently around the room, inspecting the walls, the doors, the windows. Lila watched him, fascinated. He was meticulous, commanding, but when he paused near her chair there was something different. Something human flickering beneath the unyielding mask of royalty. You'll need to eat, he said suddenly. Human food. I cannot risk letting you faint or be incapacitated. And no, you will not skip meals because of pride. I'm not hungry, she whispered, but he ignored her. Minutes later, a small tray appeared, carefully arranged sandwiches, tea, and fresh fruit. Lila blinked. She hadn't realized he could move that fast, or that he would bother with such details. You're cautious, she said finally, breaking the silence. Caution is survival, he replied. But you're reckless. I had no choice, she said softly. I couldn't just watch him die. Adrian's gaze softened, not entirely but enough for Lila to notice. Most humans would have fled. Most would have hidden. You acted. That makes you dangerous, and rare. Lila set down her tea, her hands trembling slightly. And now I'm trapped here. With you. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned against the window, staring into the night. Then, almost quietly, he said, No. You are not trapped. You are protected. That is different. The distinction was small, but it mattered. Lila felt a strange warmth, hope, trickle into her chest. She realized something about Adrian Vale. He was more than a king, more than a vampire. He was a force of judgment, of justice, and somehow he had chosen to stand on her side. Hours passed. The wind moaned around the tower, brushing the curtains against the windows. Lila felt herself relaxing in the small, impossible safety of the room. She had survived storms before, storms of neglect, of fear, of life itself. But this was different. This storm had a protector. And she had no idea how dangerous that could be. Because the night wasn't over. Somewhere, in the hidden corridors of Blackthorn Palace, the enemy that had almost killed the king still lurked. Watching. Waiting. And Lila Hart, human, fragile, underestimated, was about to find out just how entwined her fate had become with the Vampire King. A single truth loomed in the shadows. She had kissed the king to save his life. And he had refused to let her go. The days after the gala passed in a strange, surreal blur for Lila Hart. Blackthorn Palace was no longer a distant kingdom she had only glimpsed through serving trays and whispered gossip. It was now her world, her prison, and her sanctuary all at once. The weight of her actions that night, the kiss that had saved a king, settled over her like a cloak, heavy and unyielding. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not for her uniform, not for her station, but for the courage she carried inside. King Adrian Vale remained as intimidating as ever, but there were moments that were different. Small moments that betrayed the centuries of control and dominance he wielded effortlessly. The subtle adjustment of her blanket on the chaise when he thought she wasn't looking. The careful placement of her favorite tea beside her chair without a word. A flicker of curiosity when she stumbled upon an old text of vampire history in the library. It was all silent, almost invisible, but Lila noticed. She also noticed that she was no longer invisible in the palace. The nobles whispered behind their masks, casting uneasy glances her way. The human who kissed the king, they muttered, shaking their heads in disbelief. She had become a presence they couldn't ignore, a ripple in a pond that was otherwise perfectly controlled. And while some sought to intimidate her, others, curious, cunning, watched silently, waiting for the king's reaction. One evening, as winter winds rattled the castle's windows, Adrian found her in the library. Books towered around her like silent sentinels, yet she was trembling. Not from cold, but from uncertainty. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low, almost soft, startling her. I just need time," she admitted, closing the ancient manuscript she'd been reading. "This is all too much. I'm human. I don't belong here." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "You belong where you are brave. And you were brave the night of the gala." Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks. I had to save you. That's all." Adrian's eyes narrowed, though not in anger. "That's never just all. It is everything." The way he spoke made her heart pound, not fear but something foreign. Something dangerous. Something that made her want to lean closer even though she knew better. Then, without warning, he changed the subject. "I need to know more about you, Lila Hart. You possess qualities uncommon among humans. Courage, intelligence, restraint under pressure. And yet there is something more. Something hidden." Her throat went dry. She had always hidden her past, her secrets, her abilities. She had survived by being underestimated, invisible, unnoticed. And now, Adrian Vale, the most powerful being she had ever met, was staring straight at her, seeing something beneath her carefully constructed walls. I don't know what you mean," she murmured, though a small part of her burned to tell him everything. "You will not lie to me," he said simply, a subtle warning in his tone. "It is unnecessary and I will see the truth." And then came the test. A minor accident. A servant tripped carrying a tray of boiling water, and Lila's reaction was instantaneous. With hands trembling yet precise, she managed to prevent burns from reaching the injured servant, applying herbs and remedies she had learned as a child from her grandmother. Adrian watched silently from the shadows, expression unreadable. But when the servant's panic turned to relief, Lila glanced up and met his gaze. His silver eyes flickered with a new emotion, recognition, respect, something deeper. "You know healing," he said quietly. "I learned a little," she admitted, suddenly feeling small under his scrutiny. "And you know courage," he added, stepping closer. "And restraint. And compassion. That combination is rare. Valuable." She swallowed, confused by both his words and the strange flutter in her chest. "Valuable? I'm just human." He reached out, not to touch her, but to indicate a shelf above her head. "Not just human, Lila. Someone like you can change the balance here. You have the power to influence the lives of countless beings. And he paused, his eyes locking on hers, sharp, commanding, yet tinged with vulnerability. "I need you alive. Not just tonight, not just for protection, but because you matter." Her breath caught. Alive. Not a pawn, not a servant, not a witness, but someone who mattered to the Vampire King himself. Before she could process, a sudden noise from the hallway shattered the fragile moment. Guards shouted, boots echoing on the stone floor. Adrian's body stiffened instantly, predatory energy radiating from him. Lila followed his gaze and saw a shadowy figure vanish around a corner. "Another attempt," Adrian muttered. "You could be in danger right now because of who you are." Lila's stomach turned. "Because of me?" "Yes," he said coldly. "And because of what you represent. Courage, integrity, kindness. These are dangerous things in a world ruled by fear." He took her hand, not roughly but firmly, guiding her to the nearest hidden passage he had long used to move unseen. Lila's pulse raced, fear and something else mingling inside her. "Why do you care?" she whispered as they descended into the shadows. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Because someone must protect the world from those who would use power for cruelty. And because you have reminded me that even kings are not immune to humanity." As the passage led them to safety, Lila realized something profound. She had entered Blackthorn Palace as a servant, invisible and weak. Now she was alive, seen and protected. But more than that, she had begun to occupy a space in Adrian's heart that no one else had. And for the first time she understood that her life, and her choices, carried consequences far beyond her imagination. Outside, the winter wind howled, rattling the ancient stones of the palace. Inside, a human girl and a vampire king shared a moment that would change the course of both their fates forever. A single truth lingered, heavy and undeniable. Bravery, kindness and courage were more dangerous, and more powerful, than any weapon. And Lila Hart had them all. The days in Blackthorn Palace were no longer just surreal, they were a constant lesson in patience, observation and fear. Lila Hart had learned quickly that survival here was about more than avoiding poison or assassination attempts. It was about understanding a world built on power, secrecy, and centuries-old rules she had only glimpsed in whispers. King Adrian Vale allowed her freedom in certain corridors, yet the weight of his presence was ever near. She felt it in the hush of the guards, the careful steps of the servants, and even in the faintest glance of the nobles when she passed by. Everyone knew now that she was not just a human who had saved the king, she was a woman who had earned his attention. That alone drew envy, suspicion, and danger. Lila spent her mornings in the vast library, studying everything she could about vampire history, poisons, and ancient rituals. The knowledge wasn't for idle curiosity, it was survival. And one afternoon, as sunlight dimmed behind the tall, arched windows, she stumbled upon something unusual. A text describing a rare human gift, a blood resonance, a power that could influence vampire vitality if wielded correctly. Her heart raced. She had heard stories of humans with subtle abilities, passed down through bloodlines, usually dismissed as legend. Could she, an ordinary girl raised in the harsh streets, possess such a gift? That night, as snow drifted softly against the towering windows of the palace, Adrian appeared at the library doorway. His silver eyes caught the lamplight, glowing faintly in the dim room. "You're thinking too hard," he said, his voice low, almost teasing. "Or are you plotting something?" Lila jumped slightly, clutching the book to her chest. I found something. About humans, about powers we might have. Something about blood resonance. It's real apparently." Adrian's eyes narrowed, but not in anger. "You have it?" I don't know," she admitted. "I just read about it. Maybe it's meaningless. Maybe I'm imagining things." He stepped closer, and for the first time since the gala, Adrian's expression softened. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, not violently, not possessively, just careful. You are not imagining things. Humans can surprise you. Her breath caught at the intimacy of the gesture. It was not the touch of a king or a predator or even a ruler, it was a moment of connection. One human girl, one immortal king, separated by centuries, yet somehow united in understanding. You don't have to be strong all the time, he murmured. I see your courage, but courage without knowledge is a risk. Power without guidance is dangerous. If you do possess this ability, it could change everything. Before Lila could respond, the alarm sounded. The guards shouted, doors slammed, and the echo of boots thundered through the palace. Another intrusion, more skilled, more deliberate this time. Adrian's demeanor shifted instantly. He moved like smoke, fluid and predatory, his silver eyes blazing. Stay here, he commanded, though his hand lingered near hers for a fraction too long. Lila knew better than to disobey, yet her instincts screamed at her. She had knowledge, herbs, and perhaps even powers she hadn't fully understood. She could help, even in a small way, she had to try. She followed Adrian through a side passage, unseen by the attackers, until they reached the west wing. There, a masked figure waited, dagger in hand, eyes gleaming with lethal intent. Adrian stepped forward, but Lila's courage flared. Something deep inside her stirred, a resonance she hadn't known existed. Her heartbeat synchronized with the king's pulse. The world blurred. She felt energy flowing through her, subtle but undeniable, a warmth rising from her blood, a power no one had taught her to wield. The masked figure froze, eyes wide. Adrian tilted his head, surprised. What? Lila stepped forward, voice steady despite the adrenaline. Stay back. The intruder lunged, and for the first time Lila acted instinctively. She focused on the sensation in her veins, the rhythm of Adrian's presence, the surge of energy that seemed to answer her command. The figure staggered, disoriented, as if unseen chains held them in place. Adrian's expression darkened, not from fear but from recognition. You're stronger than you realize, he whispered, almost to himself. Together they subdued the intruder, who collapsed in a heap, utterly powerless. Adrian looked at Lila, eyes unreadable but glowing with a mix of awe and something, tenderness. You just saved more than yourself tonight, he said, voice low, resonant. You saved me. Lila's chest pounded. She hadn't expected praise or recognition or closeness. She had only wanted to survive. And now she understood. She wasn't just a human girl in a palace. She was part of something larger, something destined. As the palace returned to quiet, Adrian led her to the balcony. Snow fell in thick flakes, soft against the darkened city below. Lila shivered, but not from the cold. This was something different, something stirring in her heart. You could use this gift wisely, Adrian said, leaning closer. Not for power. Not for revenge. But for protection, for justice. For those who cannot protect themselves. I don't know if I can, Lila admitted, voice trembling. You already have, he said simply. Tonight proves it. And you will continue to do so. I trust you, Lila Hart. The words struck her in a way she had never imagined. Trust, protection, recognition. All from a vampire king whose power and influence were unmatched. And as she looked into his silver eyes, she realized something terrifying and thrilling. Her life, her courage, her hidden abilities, everything, were now inseparable from his world. Outside, snow swirled under the pale moonlight. Inside, a human girl and a vampire king shared a secret, a power, and a connection that neither fully understood, but both knew would change their fates forever. Because Lila Hart had discovered something she didn't yet name, a hidden power that could protect a kingdom, a king, and perhaps, in time, herself. And King Adrian Vale, for the first time in centuries, felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. The days that followed Lila Hart's revelation of her hidden power were unlike anything she had ever experienced. Blackthorn Palace had shifted from being a place of shadows and fear into a living labyrinth of possibility, danger, and whispered intrigue. She was no longer just the human who had kissed the Vampire King. She was a force, a fragile, unpredictable, dangerous force that could alter the course of the entire kingdom. King Adrian Vale watched her closely, yet differently now. The silver eyes that had once been cold and impenetrable held a quiet intensity whenever they lingered on her. It was not just fascination, it was respect, admiration, and perhaps the smallest flicker of something more profound, something Lila could not yet name, though her heart betrayed her every time he drew near. The palace itself seemed to sense the shift. Guards moved with renewed vigilance, whispering about the failed assassination attempt and the girl who had single-handedly stopped it. Nobles scowled, plotting behind their masks, murmuring that a human dared to disrupt centuries of power and control. Lila felt their stares, their suspicion, but Adrian's presence was always a shield, a tangible force that kept her safe. One evening, as the first snow of deep winter blanketed the palace grounds, Adrian summoned her to the council chambers. It was rare for humans to enter these hallowed halls, and Lila's pulse quickened with a mixture of fear and excitement. "You've been learning quickly," Adrian said quietly as they walked the marble corridors. "More quickly than I expected." "I have to," Lila replied softly. I can't let anything happen to you or the kingdom." He paused, his gaze catching hers. "You do more than protect me, Lila. You protect the balance. You remind us that courage and compassion are as powerful as strength and bloodlines. You carry something within you, something the kingdom has needed for centuries." They entered the council chamber. Ancient tapestries lined the walls, depicting battles long forgotten, victories etched in the lifeblood of vampires. Adrian's advisors, elders of noble houses, glanced at her with curiosity, and in some cases thinly veiled disdain. "Your Majesty," one elder said, voice silk and venom, "this human, you claim she is part of our defenses?" Adrian's silver eyes cut into him. "She is more than that. She is essential. And I trust her." A hush fell. Lila felt the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her. She was ordinary, human, vulnerable, and yet, tonight she would have to prove she was anything but. The council debated, voices rising and falling like the tide. Then came a sudden commotion, an alert from the northern wing. Adrian's hand brushed hers as they moved swiftly. Lila's heart raced, but she did not hesitate. She had seen danger, faced it head-on, and survived. They arrived at a hall where a shadowy figure lurked. Before Adrian could act, Lila stepped forward, heart synchronized with her instincts. Her hidden power flared again, subtle yet undeniable. The intruder froze, caught as if invisible chains bound them. The council guards hesitated, astonished, and Adrian's eyes widened, not with fear but recognition. "You're learning quickly," he whispered to her, voice low and proud. After the threat was neutralized, they returned to the council chamber. The elders regarded her differently now, some with grudging respect, others with wary awe. Lila realized that she had crossed a threshold. She was no longer invisible. She had become indispensable. That night, alone on the balcony with Adrian, Lila finally allowed herself to speak. Why do you trust me so much?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, silver eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "Because you act from courage and compassion, not fear or ambition. That is rare. That is precious." Her chest tightened. She had expected gratitude, respect, maybe even protection, but not this. Not the weight of his gaze, the quiet intensity that made her pulse race, the subtle way he seemed to care without saying it. "I'm just human," she said, voice trembling. "You are more than that," he said softly. "And because of you, this kingdom will survive another century. You've reminded me that even kings, even immortal rulers, are not immune to the power of humanity." Their eyes met, and in that silence, something shifted. A bridge between mortal and immortal, vulnerability and power, fear and trust. Lila's hand brushed his, almost accidentally, yet neither pulled away. The electricity between them was undeniable, dangerous, and intoxicating. Before either could speak again, a message arrived, urgent, insistent. Another plot had been uncovered, deeper, more insidious than before. The kingdom itself trembled under the weight of conspiracies and ambition. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his hand lingered near Lila's for a fraction longer than necessary. "You're coming with me," he said, and for once, there was no argument in her heart. As they moved through the snow-blanketed halls, Lila realized the truth she had tried to ignore. She was no longer just surviving. She was living, thriving. And somewhere between the thrill of danger and the closeness of Adrian, she was beginning to understand the first stirrings of love. A love forged not in grand gestures or words, but in shared peril, mutual respect, and the knowledge that their fates were entwined. The kingdom awaited them. Shadows moved. Alliances shifted. And in the heart of Blackthorn Palace, a human girl and a vampire king were discovering that their bond was not only powerful, it was unstoppable. Because Lila Hart had become more than a witness. She was a force, a protector. And Adrian Vale was beginning to realize that perhaps, in all his centuries, he had never truly known what it meant to care. The palace was alive with tension. Every corridor, every shadow, every whisper held danger. Lila Hart had long since shed her invisibility. She was no longer the timid, unnoticed human who served trays at vampire galas. She was essential, brave, powerful in ways she had only begun to understand. And tonight that power would be tested like never before. King Adrian Vale moved beside her, a dark, commanding presence that seemed to bend the very air. His silver eyes, always piercing, glimmered with a mixture of concern and something Lila had learned to recognize in the past weeks: protectiveness. The threat had grown beyond a single assassin or poison goblet. A faction of rogue vampires, seeking to seize the throne while Adrian's attention had been elsewhere, had infiltrated the palace. Their plans were cunning, dangerous, and lethal. "You've never fought like this before," Adrian said quietly as they navigated the hidden corridors. "But I trust you." "I have to try," Lila replied, voice steady though her heart pounded. "I can't, not now." He glanced at her, and for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them. It was more than gratitude, more than duty. It was connection. A shared pulse of fear and courage that had grown into trust, respect, and something far deeper. They emerged into the grand hall, where shadows moved like living creatures. Adrian's commanding presence took control immediately. Guards fell into position, noble vampires watched with awe, and Lila felt her own power stirring. Her blood, alive with resonance, pulsed in rhythm with Adrian's heartbeat. It was subtle, invisible to others but tangible to her, and to him. "You ready?" he asked, voice low, almost intimate. "I'm ready," she whispered. The rogue faction lunged. Chaos erupted. Claws and fangs flashed in the dim light, and Lila felt fear surge, but alongside it her newfound power. She focused, instinctively channeling the resonance that linked her to Adrian's strength. The intruders froze, disoriented, unable to move as if held by invisible chains. Even the most experienced vampires faltered under the subtle but undeniable force radiating from her. Adrian's gaze never left her. "Good. Keep it steady. Control it." She did. With each pulse of her power, the invaders' coordination faltered. Guards seized the advantage, neutralizing the threat one by one. Lila's heart raced, but she felt no fear, only clarity. She understood in that moment that her courage and compassion, her human heart, had tipped the balance. She was not just a survivor, she was a protector. When the hall fell silent, when the last intruder was restrained, Adrian turned to her. His expression was unreadable at first, then softened. "You did it. You saved the kingdom tonight." Lila swallowed hard. Her body was trembling, exhaustion hitting her all at once. But his gaze held her firm, unyielding, and in it she saw something she had never imagined: pride. And something more, desire, quiet but undeniable, threading between them like fire. "You were incredible," he said quietly, stepping closer. The air around them seemed to hum. "Not just brave, extraordinary." I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. He reached for her hand, a gesture so gentle it was almost shocking after the night's chaos. "You don't understand. You had it in you all along. I only helped you see it." Their eyes locked, silver meeting brown, mortal meeting immortal, fear giving way to something far more potent: trust, understanding, and the slow-burning embers of love. Lila felt her pulse sync with his, heart and blood and courage entwined in a rhythm older than the castle itself. I don't know what comes next," she admitted softly. Adrian's hand lifted to cup her face, thumbs brushing her cheek with careful reverence. "What comes next is ours to decide. I do not discard the brave. I do not ignore the kind. And I do not let go of those who touch my heart the way you have touched mine." Lila's breath caught. Her mind screamed with disbelief, wonder, and yearning. She had kissed a king once in desperation to save his life. Now, standing amidst the remnants of battle and the cold winter night, she realized something profound. She had also captured his heart. The kingdom would survive. The rogue threats were vanquished. Justice had been served, and the palace, once a place of shadows and fear, felt alive with possibility. But more than anything, Lila understood that her journey, from invisible human to protector, from outsider to essential companion, was only the beginning. Adrian leaned closer, voice a low murmur meant only for her. "Stay with me. Not because you must, but because you choose to. Not because you fear the world, but because you trust it with me." Tears pricked her eyes, not of fear but of relief, awe, and something she had long denied: love. I choose," she whispered. He smiled then, a rare, dangerous, beautiful smile that could melt kingdoms and shatter centuries of isolation. "Then you are mine," he said simply, possessively yet tenderly. And in that moment the mortal and immortal, human and vampire, courage and power, love and destiny became inseparable. Lila Hart, the girl who had kissed a king to save his life, was no longer invisible. She was his equal, his companion, his queen in all but name. The snow fell softly around the palace, washing the night in silver light. Within, a kingdom had been saved, threats neutralized and hearts forever bound. The Vampire King and the human girl stood together, alive, unafraid and inescapably entwined. Because some bonds are forged not by blood or eternity, but by courage, kindness and a single desperate act of love.